My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the day's big issue that need looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and no one will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Christopher Hope, Associate Political Editor at The Daily Telegraph, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. Labour unveils its plan to tackle skyrocketing living costs. Sir Keir Starmer says he'd hit energy companies for more tax to help cover the £30 billion cost of freezing bills at last year's prices. Could that work? Plus, the number of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats this year has exceeded 20,000. That's double the number who crossed this time last year. And the UK's first 4-day week trial. Does it work to work a day less? We'll get an update on the experiment seeking to change our work-life balance. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. What do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. First, though, it's time for the GB News headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs, a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for the next 6 months. Paid for, in part, by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies, he says families wouldn't then have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies disagree. They describe the opposition's plans as an illusion. Ministers are coming under increasing pressure to do more to address the rising cost of living. Speaking to reporters, Sir Keir Starmer today said his party's solution to soaring costs was the opposite to what the government is providing.
I think in a national emergency like this, where we've got so many families anxious about paying the bills, it's right politically that we say every penny should go to reducing those bills, not to compensating shareholders. What I wanted to make sure was that today we could put a fully costed, credible plan on the table which actually answers the question, what will you do to help so many struggling households this winter?
Iran's foreign ministry says Sir Salman Rushdie and his supporters are solely to blame for the attack that's left the author with life-changing injuries. Rushdie's son says his father's feisty and defiant sense of humour remains intact. The 75-year-old author was stabbed several times on stage at a literary event in New York. He's now off the ventilator. The man accused of attacking him, 24-year-old Hadi Matar, has pleaded not guilty to attempted murder and assault. The government has announced the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket prices rises are traditionally linked to July's Retail Prices Index, which hasn't yet been published. The Department for Transport said, in addition, the increased prices would be delayed until March from January in a bid to help struggling households. Today marks 1 year since the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. A national holiday has been declared in the country as citizens are encouraged to go and celebrate. The Taliban declared control of the city last year amid a mass evacuation of US forces and refugees. Humanitarian aid into the country has been cut significantly since the Taliban took over, and as world leaders demand greater rights for Afghans, particularly for women and girls. Defence commentator Jamil Jaffer told GB News he's concerned over terrorist groups reforming in the country.
An important day for the U.S. to mark the end of that military operation. At the same time, very challenging day because of the people that were left behind and our allies that were left behind, and that we continue to try to get out of that country. And of course, the concern that the Taliban will permit Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups to reform there in Afghanistan remains a significant concern with the recent killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri there in Kabul itself.
The Met Office is issuing a yellow warning of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding for most of the UK. It's a 2-day warning which begins today. It could cause flash flooding, transport disruption and power cuts. That weather warning is going to stay in place for southern England until Wednesday. They're warning that communities could be cut off by flooded roads and the chance of fast-flowing or deep floodwater could cause danger to life. Now, despite this news, a hosepipe ban is going to be imposed in Cornwall and parts of Devon from the start of next week. Experts highlight that despite possible flash flooding in the coming days, it won't be enough to reverse parts of the UK being officially in drought. South West Water says it's the first time in 26 years they've had to implement the measures, despite, they say, making vast improvements to water storage. They are now the 6th water company in the UK that's had to introduce restrictions after an official drought was declared across parts of England on Friday. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to We Need to Talk About.
Winter is coming. Soon, all that heat clamming up your bed sheets will be gone, and you'll be begging for even half a degree of it as your teeth chatter and your shower coughs out a few dribbles of lukewarm water. Yet nobody has really made a concrete plan on what to do about it, despite one desperately being needed months ago. Well, now there's the Starmer proposal, which involves finding a whopping 30 billion spondoolies to plug the energy price cap at last year's limits, even if it means it would also be helping the likes of Rishi to heat up his swimming pool this winter. Then there's hardline handout hater Truss, who proudly brags about somehow growing the economy instead, even though factories will probably be forced to switch off machines and only makers of thermal underwear will think about investing in Britain. The red wall will indeed turn blue as hypothermia sets in, while even the bills of blue bloods will enter the red. So no surprise that 3 in 4 Tory voters also back Labour's plan. The problem is, it's all hypothetical hot air while the Prime Minister is off on his hollybobs again. It will all be someone else's problem, he must think. And where even is the government? They're having round tables with the energy companies piling up the profits. We'll be charging Granny Goggins 100 quid a teapot come Christmas. So, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says families would not pay a penny more on their energy bills this winter under Labour's plans to tackle rising living costs. The package, he says, would be paid for, in part, by a big increase in tax on oil and gas company profits. Well, does it all add up? Let's speak to former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, usually the adage is, isn't it, that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So where's the catch in this policy?
Well, in this particular case, I mean, there's only one catch. I'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, I just loved your intro. Winter is coming. I thought you were channeling, maybe the Game of Thrones. Was that another blonde queen? I can't remember.
That's what's happening between Truss and Sunak, I think.
But look, what's great about the Starmer plan is 3 special reasons. Firstly, it'll help us, get us through the winter by backdating the windfall tax back to January. The money's coming from the companies that are just swimming in cash. I mean, Aramco made 49 billion in the last 3 months. It's obscene. So it's very, very good from that point of view. It's also very good from another point of view. The biggest problem we face right here and now is industrial strife. It's the strikes all over the place. And why is everybody striking? Because of cost of living. And we all know that if everybody in this country simply had a pay rise, all that would happen is inflation would rocket. People would then be dragged into the tax bracket when what's called, fiscal. Removing the cause of the discontent, then that actually goes a long. And thirdly, what's really crucial is that the Starmer plan isn't just about today. The curse of politics is short-termism. He's actually talking about what happens in 2-3 years' time, because we're going to be faced with a long, long period of high energy costs. He's talking about nuclear, onshore, offshore wind. He's talking about tidal. He's talking about solar. He's talking about all the things that make Liz Truss wake up in the night cursing and swearing. But I have to say, this is such a good scheme that I'm pretty bloody sure the Tories, when they kind of wake up from their zombie half-sleep, will actually probably pinch it from us.
Well, I think there'll be a lot of people out there hoping that they indeed will. But there must be a reason why this isn't being done. There must be a reason, actually, why Liz Truss wants to potentially reverse windfall taxes. And that's because these big companies' profits shore up things like pensions. And also, if you start taxing big business when they happen to be doing well, what are you going to do when they're also struggling? Which, of course, energy companies have done in the past. I mean, it's a quick fix, dirty solution, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's not a quick fix. What's really good about this is actually it's sensible, serious, and pragmatic and long-term. And I think that's what's really, really... Look, the real problem here is the dividing line is ideology. There is a theory, among sort of hardcore Tories that money should fructify in the pockets of the people, and that somehow the marginal propensity to consume will somehow raise living standards. It's all cobblers. I mean, if people haven't got money to spend, they can't spend it. And the idea of cutting tax is going to unleash the great sleeping giant of British capitalism and public consumption. I mean, that's cobblers. We've been there before. It simply doesn't work. We have all the philosophy of capital arguments. We can talk about that. The reality is that people today are very much worried about 8:30, not just 2030. And we've got to actually have solutions that apply for today and for tomorrow and the day after. The one lacuna in this whole thing, which I have to say, I don't speak to Keir, not since we had a game of football in Northolt a couple of years ago. Nothing dodgy happened, I hasten to add. But the one thing that we do need to actually incorporate in this is business. Because at the moment, business is not affected by the energy cap. The energy cap on domestic consumption at the moment is, 1,197 or something. If we keep it to that, rather than the 4,000 that would go up otherwise, then we do a huge favour for the domestic consumer. Now, I appreciate business women and businessmen are also domestic consumers. But, as you touched on in your intro, a lot of factories are simply not going to be able to afford this. So what we need to do is to address the issue not just of the domestic consumer, but also of business.
I mean, you talk about Starmer having long-termism. I think successive governments for about 2 decades have talked about creating a smorgasbord of energy options for the country, and none of them have delivered on it. But how on earth is that going to be funded if you're whacking whopping great taxes, even retrospectively, on energy companies who are the ones who are supposed to invest in renewables? And this is going to cost, if this was rolled out for the course of the year, 60 billion Stephen pounds. Where's the money going to come from?
Look, back in the day, when you maybe were just a blush on your mother's cheek. I remember Margaret Thatcher when she introduced the windfall taxes back in the 80s. And everybody said, you're going to kill enterprise, you're going to actually kill business. And she pointed out that any business that's making that amount of profit has to exist in society, has to exist in the real world, has to exist in the community. And there's an obligation on that. It didn't work then. Thatcher, and please don't quote me on this too often, but Thatcher was absolutely right when she defended windfall taxes. Now, the idea that business people around the world are going to say, stone me, the Labour government or the Tory government or anybody in England is going to actually start hitting our obscene profits means we're not going to invest. Well, I've got news for you. The energy companies aren't flipping British anyway. They owe us nothing. They're all French and German because they've all been flogged off and sold off. If we had a sensible policy in a few years' time when we can afford to actually bring the energy companies back into public ownership, but frankly, we couldn't afford it at the moment. But when we can do that, then we can actually talk about the national interest. At the moment, the national interest is spoken in French or with a German accent, and that cannot be right.
Stephen, fantastic having you on, as always. It's always a delight having you on. You put a big smile on my face. You've been making Chris Hope chuckle as well to my side. So thanks for that analysis. Really great to speak to you again. Well, now a number of charities have written an open letter to Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss about their growing concerns over the energy crisis. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation is one of them. Its Associate Director, Helen Barnard, joins me now. Now, Helen, tell us more about what this letter actually says.
So what it says is that 70 organisations, charities, community groups across the country have come together to say we are facing a really grave emergency. So already about 3/4 of people who are on universal credit and similar benefits, already nearly 3/4 of them have had to go without at least one essential. And we have millions of people already getting into arrears with bills and building up debt, including risky debt. And that we need the government to step in with far more support, and we need them to do it quickly.
I mean, when we hear headlines talking about the crisis, the looming crisis that's coming, average bills going up to around £5,000 per annum come January. And what does that mean for ordinary people? Who is it that's going to say, golly gosh, I can't pay my bills? Is it just those on universal credit, or is this spreading all the way out to, throughout society to those on medium and even above average salaries?
I think, what we're most concerned about is the really serious hardship facing people on low incomes. So people in the bottom 20 or 30%, because for those people, what they're facing is, real destitution in some cases. So people who are having to sell possessions, who are doing things like not using their cookers, not being able to cook food. People who already anticipate that in the winter they know they're not going to be able to put their heating on, so they and their children will just have to go to bed wearing lots and lots of clothes. So it's those people we're most concerned about. I think there are people who are kind of middle income. Some of them will be okay. Some of them, though, don't have the kind of level of headroom that will let them absorb this level of cost without potentially getting into debt. And of course, there are lots of people on higher incomes who can afford these prices. This isn't a kind of universal, nobody can afford this. It is very much people at the bottom facing dire, dire hardship, and some of the people in the middle risking being pulled down.
So what do you think of Sir Keir Starmer's proposal to cap the energy bills at last year's prices? Is that going to be enough, or is there a problem there that it's actually not targeted towards the people you were talking about? We may have lost Helen there, actually, unless her lights have suddenly gone out. It looks incredibly dark the other side of the screen, but thankfully I have Christopher Hope to light the studio up. Stephen Pound's analysis, it sounded brilliant. I was there waiting to have a general election tomorrow and go and vote Labour and say, isn't that great? And, the government's being caught napping, if we do have a government at the moment.
Well, I'm long enough to remember what happened in March, when Boris Johnson, who is still the Prime Minister, tried to get Rishi Sunak to do more on bills. He saw this big problem come this winter. The idea, as your guest there said, of people wearing more clothes in bed, stay warm. The scale of these increases will be unaffordable to millions of families, and that's the electoral problem going forward. And it looks the Tories are playing catch up on a big idea, and I think Keir Starmer, to his credit, has now offered a big idea. Let's look at the cost of that, though. 6 months of it is the same cost as furlough, which was a once in a 100-year pandemic. And of course, as you say there, in fact, Stephen Pound said there, this is a 3-year, 4-year problem with energy prices. What happens in April? Do we keep racking up debt? Do we keep increasing or carrying on with this windfall tax, which meant to be a time-limited thing rather than going on forever? So I think it's an idea, and it's a good idea. It's finally something which 3 and 4 Tory voters support. And I think he's gone further than either Liz Truss, and certainly more than Rishi Sunak will do when one of them wins prime ministership in 3 weeks' time.
Well, let's go back to Helen Barnard, who has thankfully been able to reconnect to us, and ask her what she thinks about Sir Keir Starmer's plans. Is the problem with his proposal that it's not means-tested, it's not targeting the desperate people, the sort of 20% on universal credit who are really going to be in a mess? It actually helps, billionaires heat their swimming pools if energy prices universally capped.
Yeah, so I think what it shows is that they are grasping the scale of the crisis we're facing and the scale of the intervention that's needed. I think there's probably 2 things that are a concern. So one is that although energy costs are obviously top of everyone's mind, when we analysed what's going on for the cost of living for those on lower incomes, it's not just energy. What we found is that actually, even when you take energy out of the picture, those families are facing about £1,000 in increased costs of things like food and other essentials. So that is something which people are still facing. And because social security was eroded to a 40-year low, people really don't have the headroom to meet these kinds of increased costs. I mean, the other thing, of course, as you say, is this is something for everybody. That means that although it will help those at the bottom, it is also spending a lot of money helping people at the top. I think, that is a choice for a government to make. They can choose to kind of protect everybody. But I think the key is that mustn't squeeze out giving enough help to those at the bottom who should be our top priority.
Helen, thank you so much for rejoining us. Helen Barnard there from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Well, coming back to you, Chris, Helen there saying that, at least it shows that somebody gets the scale of the crisis. It does feel a bit like that this navel-gazing, this sort of self-indulgent leadership process is all happening while Boris Johnson's on holiday, and we're being told that millions of people face destitution.
Well, what I hear today from the Number 10 briefing that Dominic Raab's in charge and Boris Johnson on his second holiday this month, isn't it, will be called in for big choices. Nobody phoning up Zelensky again in Ukraine, whatever he might do there. But I mean, clearly there's a concern here. I do think, though, is what Helen was saying there on choices, because Keir Starmer is looking to help everybody, including Rishi Sunak's swimming pool heating bill, as you said earlier, as much as those on lowest incomes. And I think Sunak and others have been trying to target the money towards the lower end rather than give everyone this break. But I think the scale of this, and it's so far-reaching, I think, that something big, a big bazooka like this is required.
Yeah, interesting comments from a newspaper that largely isn't always in favour of the Labour Party. Chris, thank you so much. I want to know your views. I mean, it does sound very good, doesn't it? Is Sir Keir Starmer's plan to tax the big energy companies to help tackle those rising living costs a good one? Or can you see the potential pitfalls? Do email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at GBNews. You are with GB News on TV and radio. Coming up, the number of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats has exceeded 20,000 this year. That's twice as many as this time last year. It's time for a short break now and a check on the weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We're transitioning back to more typical UK weather this week. Cloudier and cooler for many. A risk of thunderstorms, but some places over the next couple of days will stay dry. These thunderstorms will be hit and miss. Low pressure has replaced high pressure, and it's brought a lot more cloud and some outbreaks of rain. It's also turning things cooler, but still some sunshine around and still some heat, especially in the east and the southeast during the rest of Monday. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, some outbreaks of rain for central and southern Scotland, some heavy rain here at times. More likely to be showery elsewhere, and just about anywhere could see a heavy shower or thunderstorm this afternoon. Temperatures still reaching 30 Celsius in the southeast, but cooler further north and west, with those temperatures reaching the high teens or low 20s. Through the evening, showers and thunderstorms continue for a time. Again, hit and miss. Some places will avoid them. Some more prolonged rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland, and particularly lively showers there for South Wales and the southwest. Otherwise, again, a lot of cloud cover. Another warm night, actually. Temperatures not falling far below 15 to 18 Celsius. And then we start off Tuesday with further showers, and actually quite a few showers will develop during the day, especially for northern, central and western England, Wales, as well as eastern Scotland. Drier to the far northwest and increasingly brighter, and largely sunny towards the southeast, with temperatures still reaching the high 20s, but back to around average elsewhere. High teens for Scotland and Northern Ireland, low 20s for Western England and Wales. Any showers and thunderstorms will be slow moving on Tuesday afternoon and into the evening. Falling onto dry ground, of course, that could cause some issues where the most intense rain does fall and lightning strikes and hail and so on. Wednesday sees further showers and thunderstorms in the far south, but Thursday is a drier day for many before more rain in the west later.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
More than 20,000 people have been detected crossing the English Channel in small boats so far this year, government figures reveal. Some 607 were detected on Saturday, the third time the total has topped 600 in a day since the start of 2022. Our Home and Security Editor Mark White has the detail.
Arriving at Dover Harbour overnight, the local lifeboat with 50 people on board who'd been detected crossing into UK waters on a small boat late into the night. These crossings, which just a year ago were predominantly happening early in the morning, are now taking place day and night. The times they cross are now more unpredictable. What is certain is that the numbers crossing are growing rapidly. 20,300 so far this year. That number is double what it was at this time last year. Within days, it'll hit 21,000, and with the exponential rise in the numbers arriving, is on course to easily more than double the 28,500 who crossed in the whole of last year. For the government, this is a deepening crisis ministers seem powerless to prevent. Since Boris Johnson announced a three-pronged plan in April to help tackle the small boat crisis, 15,000 people have crossed the Channel. Plans to house up to 1,200 asylum seekers here in the Yorkshire village of Linton-on-Ouse have now been abandoned amid a huge public backlash. And proposals to send thousands of others to Rwanda for processing have been mired in legal challenges and are unlikely to happen anytime soon. Still, both candidates for the Tory leadership say they remain wedded to the Rwanda plan and would consider extending it to include other willing countries, providing they can overcome the legal difficulties.
Well, our Home and Security Editor Mark White joins Christopher Hope and I to discuss these figures. Mark, it's no surprise, is it? We knew that especially with the hot weather and settled conditions, more people are going to come, but double the number of last year and, 10,000 plus more since the Rwanda plan was talked about.
And the thing is as well, although we say, it's been great weather and it has been very hot, actually the wind conditions in the Channel haven't been that favourable. So there have been fewer days where it's ideal for these boats to cross. And despite that, we are at double the number. So we are going to be well over double the number of people arriving on small boats by the end of this year as we were the previous year. And of course, it doubled last year, tripled, I think, from the year before. It is increasing all the time, and it seems more rapidly.
And it's a big political problem, isn't it, Chris? Both leadership contenders not wanting to drop the Rwanda plan, if anything, saying more Rwanda as if we need more countries, when the problem is the planes aren't even taking off.
There's a view that the Rwanda idea is so popular amongst Tories. That's what both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are getting behind. But because it's been talked about so much, it's driving the numbers coming from across the Channel. Is that what you've heard, Mark?
Yes, I mean, there is no doubt that the people smugglers who are involved in this, they're actually giving discounts now to trying to get as many people across the Channel as possible before there is any closing of the net. Whether that actual remedy in terms of the Rwanda policy will come to fruition anytime soon, it's difficult to tell. It, at the moment, is mired in these legal challenges in the court. It's going to be at least October, I think, before we see any boats trying to, or any people, I should say, that have come across being sent off to Rwanda. And it all hinges on this ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, which is allowing lawyers to use a wider interpretation of a refugee to challenge in the courts. Now, both the candidates for the leadership of the Tory party, they want the courts, through the British Bill of Rights, to be able to focus their decisions on that narrower interpretation of what a refugee is through the United Nations. But while we're still signed up to that convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, it has supremacy.
And that's why it's so important, because taking back control was what Brexiters felt they were doing. And the border is so important. It's being fuelled by these legal gangs. They're trying to drive people coming here through legal routes. But, of course, I think more enforcement on the South Coast. But what is Labour's answer? Very little there. And that's why I think the Tories have a chance here, I think, to drive home the benefits of Brexit.
I mean, it's interesting that Mark mentions the ECHR, that convention. The problem, perhaps, is that we're no longer really in the Dublin Convention since Brexit. You know, I'm a Brexiteer. I do not like criticising Brexit if I can help it. But it means that we are essentially having to rely on the goodwill of France. And we don't have a legal entitlement anymore to say this is your problem to the EU.
That's why you have these sort of slightly mad ideas of, like, nets and depositing people back in ports in France, you know, without any kind of cooperation with the French authorities. That clearly can't work either. So we need to try and calm it all down and trying to find a way of tackling these legal gangs. Although
it's also fair to say, with regard to, you know, the Dublin Convention, even when we were in that convention, France never took any of those crossing via small boats back across the Channel, or indeed by lorry. So, you know, in or out, it doesn't make any difference. Yeah. France are not cooperating on that.
Chris, Mark, thank you so much. You are with GB News on TV and DAB Radio. Coming up, can working a 4-day week for the same pay be introduced in the UK? We'll get an update on the world's largest trial to change our work-life balance. Now, though, it's time for a check on the news headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 2:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has set out his party's answer to soaring living costs. It's a £29 billion plan to freeze energy bills for 6 months, paid for in part by a windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies. He says families wouldn't have to pay a penny more than their current bills for their energy over the winter. Well, Labour claim their measures would reduce the rate of inflation by up to 4%. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies, they disagree. They've described the opposition's plans as an illusion. The government's announced that the annual increase in rail fares across England will be lower this year than the rate of inflation. Ticket price rises are traditionally linked to July's Retail Prices Index, which hasn't yet been published. The Department for Transport said, in addition, the increased prices will be delayed from January until March in a bid to help struggling households. The Met Office is issuing a yellow warning from today of heavy rain and thunderstorms with the risk of dangerous flooding. The 2-day warning covers most of the UK and it says we may have flash flooding, disruption to transport and power cuts. The weather warning will stay in place for southern England until Wednesday, and the Met Office is warning that communities could be cut off by flooded roads and that floodwater could cause danger to life. The 4 suspects who were thought to be involved in the downing of the passenger jet Malaysia Airlines MH17 will be sentenced in November. Prosecutors say 1 Ukrainian and 3 Russian defendants helped supply a missile system that fired at the plane in July of 2014. 298 people were killed. The Dutch court handling the murder trial announced the date of sentencing for the suspects, who are still at large. The prosecution seeking full life sentences. We're on your TV, we're online and on your radio. It's GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Alex for We Need to Talk About.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
If there's one thing perhaps Priti Patel shouldn't be tremendously proud of, it's the scramble to take in Afghan refugees after the US and UK hastily pulled out troops, leaving the country to collapse under the Taliban. The chaotic withdrawal saw thousands of desperate people, many on hit lists having worked with Western troops, clinging to the sides of aeroplanes to try to flee to safety. While today, only 10% of applications to the UK's refugee scheme has been granted. It was 1 year ago today that the Taliban took over Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. As the black and white flag flies across the nation on what the regime has declared a holiday, 1 in 3 people face starvation, while the country becomes one of the only places on earth where women and girls are shunned from public life and banned from education. $1 trillion spent on a 30-year campaign to prevent exactly this, while the Taliban reassures the West that they have no truck with Al-Qaeda. Well, joining me now on the show is Colonel Simon Diggins, former defence attaché in Kabul. Simon, what are your thoughts about it being the 1-year anniversary since the Taliban took Kabul?
Well, hi, Alex. It's actually Mike Hewitt here from Washington,
Mike.
D.C.
My guests are the other way around, but hello, Mike. Do you know, I'm not going to ask you that question because I want to ask you a very different question. What I wanted to talk to you about is the security situation, in particular the fact that, you know, you as a former Rear Admiral of the US Navy and Deputy Advisor to the Pentagon on global affairs, this whole effort in Afghanistan was about protecting the West against terrorist organisations such as Al-Qaeda. Is that problem still there? Is that problem in resurgence since the Taliban have taken back over Afghanistan?
Well, I think you framed it exactly right, Alex. And you may recall a year ago when I came on your show, I said this was the worst foreign policy decision in my lifetime. And I think as we reflect on it a year later, all of those things have absolutely become true. Not only has their economy collapsed, women's rights have been decimated. You have hundreds of thousands of refugees still trying to escape the control of the Taliban, who now have really created the whole reason that we went into Afghanistan 19 years ago was to ensure that it never became a safe haven for Al-Qaeda again and ISIS. And now that's exactly what we have. is a safe haven by which Al-Qaeda and ISIS can plan new terrorist plots and activities. And I think as the U.S. government goes through a series of reviews, which are coming out here very soon, I think what we're going to find is the Biden administration absolutely was defiant in this decision to leave Afghanistan prior to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, when we had a fragile peace. And so what we're staring at right now is really the whole reason we went into Afghanistan is what we're back to today.
But what is the solution, Mike? Because the West have put sanctions against the regime, understandably so, but the human situation there, well, it's a disaster, isn't it? It's horrific to see that 1 in 3 people are bordering starvation. Should we be now lifting sanctions? Do we need to somehow find a way to work with the Taliban government, if only to help protect the poor people who have to live under their regime? Do we need to put troops back on the ground?
Well, as we talked about a year ago, and I think we were given a false narrative a year ago, either put more troops on the ground to protect the people or pull out completely, when neither of those solutions were the two that we had. We had a fragile peace. We had 2,500 soldiers and troops basically providing support to the Afghan military. So to answer your question, it is not too late for us to develop a plan to save the Afghan people from the Taliban government. But what you have to understand is that you're dealing with the sovereign nation of the Taliban right now, with all of the negatives that come with that.
And so you're essentially saying that, if we did go back in, it's a huge cost again, isn't it? And public opinion are unlikely to be behind that during a cost of living crisis.
It's absolutely not going to be popular to anyone to go back into Afghanistan. Republican, Democrat, US, UK, NATO, we really have created a huge problem. But we have to also consider the humanitarian crisis that's underway. We have to also understand that the reason that we found al-Sahrawi in Kabul last month was because Al-Qaeda has found a safe sanctuary in Afghanistan. So we do need to address the very, very tough and hard decisions that need to be made a year into the withdrawal.
Mike, great having you on the programme. Thanks again for your candour, as always. That's Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt. Well, joining me now on the show is Colonel Simon Diggins, who's former Defence Attaché in Kabul. Simon, it's great to have you on. I mean, Priti Patel saying she's tremendously proud of the UK's efforts in that withdrawal from Afghanistan. Thinking back to those chaotic scenes, do you find those words misplaced?
I think they are misplaced. I agree with an awful lot that the Admiral said. This was a significant failure of Western policy, politics and diplomacy. And while we can be very proud of the efforts of our soldiers, indeed many of our officials who managed to bring 15,000 people out on August 15th and the succeeding weeks afterwards, the fact we got to that stage is not clever. What has also not worked is the integration of the Afghans we have brought to this country. I saw some figures the other day which suggested that of those 15,000 people that we brought over from Afghanistan, that some 9,000 of them are still basically in hotel or other kind of temporary accommodation, haven't been resettled. And still, there are Afghans who deserve our support, who deserve sanctuary in this country, who are still stuck in Afghanistan or in neighbouring countries waiting for the Home Office to do the clearances to get them through. So we've still got a long way to go. We haven't completed the work we started last August, bringing people out. And until all the Afghans we did bring out have been properly integrated, and that means schools, education for their children, an opportunity to be good citizens of this country, which they all want to do, then the job is not finished.
As a former defence attaché in Kabul, listening to what Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt had to say about, well, it isn't necessarily too late to go back in, and, he is sort of delicately advocating that we might have to seriously consider that. Would that be something that you think should be put on the table?
There's a long way to go before that happens. I mean, it's very difficult to know what you're going to do. The reality of life is that the Taliban now have pretty well a total hold over the country itself. And there are lots of things we can do before we start thinking of conducting another intervention into the country. I mean, one area that we haven't really talked about actually is the role of Pakistan. The Taliban didn't just take over Afghanistan because the Americans left. Clearly that did not help. They did it the whole time with the support of the Pakistani government. And I note particularly that for years prior to the Taliban takeover, both in terms of US aid and UK aid, we give a great deal of money to Pakistan. I think that Pakistan owes us, and they need to do something now very dramatic to ensure that we do not have literally mass starvation in Afghanistan over the coming winter. At the moment, the Afghan country is suffering. It's the worst drought in 27 years. Now, we've got a drought this year, but how awful it's going to be in this country, we're not talking about millions of people dying or being forced to become refugees. So human rights are really important, but the most basic human right is the right to life. And that is currently under threat in Afghanistan. And that must be our number one priority.
Colonel Simon Diggins, former Defence Attaché in Kabul. They're fantastic to have you on. Chris, I mean, we spent 30 years fighting a monster that now runs the country, and with it has ushered in this grotesque humanitarian crisis. There probably isn't much appetite among the electorate to do something about it, but surely there is a degree of duty now that we have in trying to fix this somehow.
Well, there's a quid pro quo, isn't there? I mean, the Taliban is now the sovereign government in Afghanistan. The idea of, was he hinting at some form of military action now? I wasn't quite clear on how far I wanted to go with the idea of re-engaging Afghanistan. But certainly the power we have here is soft power, it's aid money, and that must be allied with issues of women's rights, which you highlighted in the beginning of your introduction. I think it's so difficult. I think we can offer them more aid money, but it must be in return for some degree of more emancipation for women out there.
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is, of course, that requires working with the Taliban government, who are prescribed, and not just via NGOs, who also, charge a huge amount for the administration of delivering aid. And, of course, the difficulty here is back at home, voters will be saying, well, we're facing a cost of living crisis too. Do you think whoever occupies number 10 will be actually wanting to tackle this?
I think in the UK, the issue of Afghans stuck in hotels is clearly wrong and appalling and has to be dealt with. That's an issue of councils and finding a space for larger families to be housed in communities across the country. That's the most pressing issue, I think, for the UK government. And longer term, looking past Ukraine, we have a war in Europe, and that's eating up a lot of the political bandwidth, I think, for international affairs. Further beyond that is Afghanistan. That's where it sits at the moment.
Yeah, Chris, couldn't agree more. Interesting to see what the current Foreign Secretary would be saying about it. Very quiet on the topic. Well, it's the world's largest experiment of its kind, offering employees the chance to work the same number of hours for the same pay, but over 4 days rather than 5. Around 30,000 employees are involved in the UK's first trial to see if companies can be more productive by changing their workplace culture. The 6-month experiment is due to end in November, but already there are reports of confusion taking hold. Some company bosses describing matters in the office as more like a scene from a Carry-On movie. But it's yet to be seen if Brits can make the transition to a 3-day weekend with more leisure time and less commuter chaos. Well, who better to talk to than Joe O'Connor, who's the Global Chief Executive of the 4-Day Week Campaign Group, which is coordinating the UK trial, in which around 70 companies are taking part. Joe, great to have you on. First of all, tell us about the rationale behind a 4-day week rather than a 5-day week.
So this is something that companies all over the world have successfully implemented as a means to, A, improve productivity by creating a greater focus on what gets done rather than the length of time you spend at the office, at the desk, or on the clock. B, to improve employee outcomes and employee well-being. And there's a lot of research that suggests that working less and working shorter and working smarter can decrease stress and decrease burnout and improve employee happiness. And then thirdly, a lot of companies are turning to the 4-day work week as a means to a competitive edge, because it's something that in a really tight labour market, it gives them an edge in terms of recruitment and retention if they're able to pull it off.
Now, one thing that strikes me, Joe, is that, you know, if you want to phone your internet service provider or something on a Saturday, or even go to your bank branch, the likelihood is you probably won't be able to. And it seems to me that we're already suffering under the strains of backlog Britain. Does the 4-day week model propose that everyone takes the same days off, Thursday, Friday, Saturday? Would it be something more rotational? And how on earth would that circle be squared?
No, it does not. So for some companies, they do go with the universal day off. Generally, that's in companies where they don't have retail elements, where they don't have a front-facing customer service aspect to their business, where it might be more project focused. But for the vast majority of companies that do have that requirement, we're talking about devising schedules to ensure that the company can continue to operate and continue to provide the same service over 5 days, 6 days, and even 7 days. I would like the opportunity, if it's granted to me, just to address the article in the Telegraph this morning that has obviously been covered and picked up by yourselves for this piece. Would it be possible for me to maybe talk about...
Of course, that's why we have you on.
Absolutely. So I think it's really important for your viewers that this isn't misrepresented. So we have 73 companies in the UK that are participating in this trial. They all started their trial at the beginning of June. We're going to be assessing this with independent researchers looking at the impact of the trial. But a story was published in the Telegraph this morning which says Boss is unsure if the UK's 4-day week trial can continue. Companies involved say the policy may not survive beyond the bumpy experiment, struggling with rota, chaos, staff confusion, etc. So we reached out, so just to say, you know, this is 3 companies that were covered in the Telegraph this morning out of 73. The vast majority of companies have said that their experience has been overwhelmingly positive, and it's gone extremely well. But we reached out to the 3 companies that were quoted in the Telegraph to ask them if they required any additional support, any additional guidance for their trial. These are the responses that we got from those 3 companies. So one of them said, I don't know if this is the case for anyone else, but it seems that the Telegraph deliberately wanted to run with a negative article. We gave a comment and it says the only challenge is recruitment, and we can't guarantee we'll continue with the trial, even though I told them it was likely we would. I also told them how in July we'd had our best ever month, performing 44% better than our last best month, with staff working 20% less. And if we could achieve that, we're on to a winner. I feel they deliberately just wanted to run with this negative angle as they only asked about the challenges. So that was one company. The second company said, thanks very much for reaching out. I think we've had ups and downs for sure, which we're at pains to tell the media, but they seem to enjoy skipping the ups, which is frustrating for all of us. There is no doubt, I suspect that the trial is just shining a light on things that potentially weren't working before, and now there is nowhere for them to hide, which I also told the Telegraph. And then finally, the third company said, yes, I agree that media pick a topic they want to portray and then skew the quotes to make it fit. We've postponed our start date of the trial because of various other elements unconnected to the 4-day week, including large projects and staff coming and going, and we want to make sure we do this carefully and in a considered manner. So those are the 3. I've intentionally 3 companies that they covered as having a negative experience. There are 70 other companies, all of which are mostly saying this is going extremely well. So I think you can tell there was a little bit of a skewed nature to that article that was ran this morning.
Joe, it was great having you on the programme to talk about the trial. Fascinating it is indeed. Joe O'Connor, Global CEO of 4-Day Week. Well, Chris, I wasn't expecting to have to put this to you as Associate Political Editor of The Telegraph.
Yeah, but, I think Joe's worrying about news. I mean, people trying to find problems with it, I suppose, and seeing where the issues are. I think it's a great idea if it can work. The article I've read, I'm looking at it here, it does talk about, CEOs did talk about greater productivity, happier staff. I did mention the positive things. It may have been emphasising elements of the work here which Joe is unhappy about, but Joe's job is to promote a 4-day week. This article is meant to be looking at how it is for everyone and how warts and all. I mean, I think that the issues of rota issues, some staff working slower than others and some working faster, and the issue, I mean, I think it's and others you're dealing with other companies on a 5-day week. It's fascinating how it's working. I mean, this is an idea which Jeremy Corbyn first came up with, don't forget. Back in 2017, it was then dismissed as being socialism gone mad. Well, it's now entering the mainstream, and maybe this is the way forward.
Maybe it's the future.
I'll see you on the beach on Friday, Alex.
Please come back, Chris. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to put you on the spot like that. Well, I'm freshly returned from a glorious sojourn in Italy where the temperature was actually manageable and petrol cost €1.65 a litre. flying over the parched pastures of dried-up Britain to learn energy bills were going up to £5,000 a year, I was tempted to beg the pilots to turn around. That was until I remembered they actually have no government in Italy at all and still have mandatory face nappies. It must be time for more Monday moaning. Now, in a truly dystopian suggestion, a report into the future of AI in the workplace has seen the suggestion of microchips being put in human brains. Well, we all kind of guessed this was the direction of travel. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised, nor should we be shocked that the suggestion was made in a report commissioned by the Law Society of England and Wales that suggests neurotechnology could make it easier for lawyers to bill clients by the hour. I can't even get on board with TikTok, let alone bits of hardware being injected directly into my cranium. So I'm happy to lead the community of neo-Luddites if anyone out there has a patch of land upon which we can establish our retreat. And what a way to repay the days of joy this magnificent beast brought us, gambling around the harbours of Oslo, napping on submarines and accidentally toppling boats over with her 1-ton heft. The adorable Freya the walrus, there she is, putting paid to some little thing there, who rather took to life in our man-made world. Well, she's been slaughtered because people wanted to take selfies with her. That's right. Despite being told to leave her well alone, authorities in Norway instead euthanized the poor creature because crowds flocked to get their special snap for the gram, worried that someone's child would be crushed while trying to capture the perfect family photo for Facebook. And aren't we so blessed? The mighty, majestic, magnanimous and merciful Montecitos are to bestow their presence on Blighty to visit causes close to their hearts. Harry and Meghan are paying a right royal visit to us in September, making sure our poor little grey island gets some glitter and glam, basking in the wake of their humbling presence as they shore up footage for their Netflix series, showing them doing kindly things. How privileged we must be to be graced by such exotic nobility, starved as we are of a royal family. Well, final thoughts to you, Chris.
Well, Harry and Meghan are coming. Lots of books are coming too. Harry's memoirs coming out in October, other books coming too. I think it's going to be a big Harry and Meghan autumn. That's good to read about. Good fun. It's a complete soap opera. Poor walrus. I love the walrus. I think, is that health and safety gone mad?
Yeah.
Slaughtering a walrus because people might take selfies near it. Ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the point about lawyers and free time, if you're doing the gardening and I think of an idea, I might start kind of build a telegraph for working for 10 minutes in a garden.
Yeah, we might actually find we deserve a 2-day week if we have microchips in our heads.
Just give it work all deal and get paid for it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm up for it. Anyway, Chris, thank you for your thoughts. And maybe Freya the walrus is up there with Harambe. R.I.P. to the both of them. Well, that's about all I've got time for. Before I go, Chris has emailed saying the cost of energy must be affordable for consumers, especially low-income families and those of us on fixed incomes, i.e. pensioners. Joanne says what we need is the government to somehow force or shame the oil companies to sell their products at a fair market price, like other businesses do. And Don says, I believe this is all down to the new PM who needs to sort this issue out. That's the job they are competing for. Mm-hmm. Well, that's about it for me. Join me again for We Need to Talk About on GB News at the same time, 2 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up next, it's The Briefing with Tom Harwood. First, though, it's time for the weather forecast. Bye-bye.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. We're transitioning back to more typical UK weather this week. Cloudier and cooler for many. A risk of thunderstorms, but some places over the next couple of days will stay dry. These thunderstorms will be hit and miss. Low pressure has replaced high pressure, and it's brought a lot more cloud and some outbreaks of rain. It's also turning things cooler, but still some sunshine around and still some heat, especially in the east and the southeast during the rest of Monday. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, some outbreaks of rain for central and southern Scotland, some heavy rain here at times. More likely to be showery elsewhere, and just about anywhere could see a heavy shower or thunderstorm this afternoon. Temperatures still reaching 30 Celsius in the southeast, but cooler further north and west, with those temperatures reaching the high teens or low 20s. Through the evening, showers and thunderstorms continue for a time. Again, hit and miss. Some places will avoid them. Some more prolonged rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland, and particularly lively showers there for South Wales and the southwest. Otherwise, again, a lot of cloud cover. Another warm night, actually. Temperatures not falling far below 15 to 18 Celsius. And then we start off Tuesday with further showers, and actually quite a few showers will develop during the day, especially for northern, central and western England, Wales, as well as eastern Scotland. Drier to the far northwest and increasingly brighter, and largely sunny towards the southeast, with temperatures still reaching the high 20s, but back to around average elsewhere.